Hello, good evening, and this is Professor Khan, and this is the lecture for Lab 4, Energy System Lab 1, and this is week 4, and we're doing pipe flaring, switching, and soldering. So let's talk about some theoretical background in this lab. Alright, here we go. So we'll talk about copper pipe, and we should learn it. Pipe and tube are the same thing. There is different they are used interchangeably between like using tubing or a pipe, but from what I understand, tubing is more flexible than pipes. So we talk about size. We'll talk about size. Oh, hold on. Okay, size, size, the pressure rating for each pipe, connections for each one of those pipes, and the price, which is very important to consider when you are buying copper tube because copper is expensive. Types of copper tubes and the processing for these tubes. Okay, moving on. So with the hands-on experience you'll have, you will need to cut, ream, and solder flexible copper tubing. So you learn how to properly cut and ream and clean pipes for connections. You will use the correct fitting on the copper tube, make a bend on the tube using a bender. We also learn how to swage, flare a copper tube, and we learn the proper way of soldering. I did post a few videos on YouTube from somebody who's doing really good soldering, and we'll do some in the lab as well. So copper tubing is mostly used for the HVAC, for tap water, for refrigerant lines, for oil lines. So you'll do a lot of copper tubing. It has high resistance to corrosion. It's soft. There are two types. There is soft and rigid tubing. The chemical symbol for copper is Cu, named after because it first came from Cyprus. I don't know. I don't think you need that, but it's good to know. It reacts with oxygen, and it forms sulfide that is green. That's why if you see any copper oxide, it usually is green color. We use 70 million tons a year. However, the good news is it's 100% recyclable without any loss of property. That's why it's a little bit expensive. Like copper uh, is one of the most expensive metals after silver. Brass is copper plus zinc. So if you see yellow copper, that's not copper, that's brass, and it gives it more rigidity. So usually copper is soft, you can bend it by hand, but if you add zinc to it, it becomes more rigid. Ductility is a property of materials, which is their ability to be able to be bent. So soft copper, this is soft, not short. Soft copper is very ductile, which means it can be annealed, treated to be soft. It can be thinned until it's a thin as sheet of paper. It's very bendable. It's a good choice for HVAC and refrigerant because it doesn't react with refrigerant that much. And and also there is some rigid coppers which is used for water lines because they'll be subjected to a lot of weight, and it's good to have the copper to be a little bit rigid. So usually we join copper using sweats, which means we can connect the two pipes together and solder some silver lead compound on it. And some rigid coppers actually they have prefabricated joints, and they have rolled grooves with some gasket inside, and there's a special crimp tool for rigid copper. Rigid copper cannot be bent, so keep that in mind. You can when you purchase the copper, are you going to need to bend it or not? If not, you might want to buy the right correct fittings. Sometimes even with bendable copper, it will be when it's thick and large. It's really hard to make the right correct bend. So it's good to just cut and use pre-made fittings to make the connection much better. So I mean, if you're doing refrigerant, probably you will run through that where you can run the refrigerant line from the inside of the house to the outside, and you want to minimize the parts where the pipe is not going in a straight line; it's going sideways. So try to make it as neat as possible. Tubing types. So K type is the thickest, has the thickest wall section, and is suitable for high pressure underground copper. pipes. So K type is the thickest, has also the thicker the pipe, the more pressure it will take. L type, a little bit thinner than K, is used. And where do you find this application? I mean, this printing, usually it's in the side of the pipe. It will say the type and the pressure rating as well. So this is also high pressure, and it's used for water, and I don't think it's used for refrigerant. M type is more common, and we use that for refrigerant, and we also use it for oil. So we will use a lot of M type in the shop. DWV is very thin that you can crimp and bend by hand. It's used for low pressure water like drainage and so on. Okay, here is the types and the thickness, and the reason I'm bringing that up is because two things. The price is higher for thicker pipe, makes sense because copper is expensive, and also the pressure rating. So if you're going to use high pressure, you make sure you use the right pressure rating. So probably it's going to be either L type or M type. M type is cheaper, but it's used mostly for oil lines because oil lines are not pressurized. L type, you might need to use that for refrigerant, especially if you're going to do central air with high refrigerant pressure. Okay, so bending, again, there are special tools for bending. Do not bend it by hand. So to get a right bend, I'll show you in the shop how to use the bender. And the bender has a groove for each pipe, and there's some kind of manual dexterity required with that, and I'll show you how it's done. There are some kind of power tools, but with small types it's easier to do by hand, and for thicker pipe, if you want to get a nice bend, you might need to get a power tool. This is called the flaring toolkit, and you might need to do that, and actually you have to do that for some installations. So this tool here is used to flare the pipe, meaning it gives it some kind of flare edge, and that is required for flare connections, and we'll do that as well. These are the holder for the pipe, and you can see they are different size. So basically you stick the pipe in here and you tighten the grip, and you will use this flare tool to give it a flare edge to be used with flare nuts. In here you see the swedging tool. Swedging is basically making the one pipe a little bit bigger, so the same pipe will fit right into it and you can weld. It's a good way to connect pipes without any pre-made fittings. And here is the cutter, and as I said, copper pipe is very soft, so be very careful with cutting that pipe, because if you do it very fast you might crimp the pipe, and if you crimp the pipe or bend it more than you need to, it's better to start with a fresh pipe than to try to fix it again. These are the flare nuts, so when we use the flare end will go on this side, and the flare nut will press on the lip over here to make a good seal. And this seal is very tight, it can withstand a lot of pressure. They are used in mini splits and ACs and also for oil lines. So there is no compound, there is no gasket, it's just basically copper pressing against copper. Sweating, that's so it's called sweating, also called soldering, where we clean the both ends of the pipe. We put something called flux. Flux is an agent that help prevent oxidation because we're using high temperature here, and also it helps draw the solder in, and you will see that you can draw. We don't have to go with the solder all around, just touching the pipe the solder will go by itself using the flux. So we will practice that a little bit, and if you notice here, when you're trying to do sweating, you heat the connection joint, not the pipe, and when the connection joint or fitting get hot, it will draw the solder inside. So what is flux? Is a chemical cleaning agent, and it's also a flowing agent or purifying agent. Make sure you use plenty of it before you start soldering. Again, the main purpose of the flux is to draw the solder in, and also to prevent oxidation. If you overheat the copper, you might oxidize it, and that will make the connection not very sound, and it might leak in the future. And we talked about leaks, and that is something you don't want to redo. So make sure you have the proper flux and the proper clean pipe before you start the job. Steps, again, clean the pipe using brush. Also, you can use some sandpaper and heat the joint, not the pipe. Use a wet towel at the bottom to cool the pipe, and be mindful that MAP gas, which we use in the shop, is 5,000 degrees, so it's very, very hot. So make sure you don't touch the pipe with your bare hand, and make sure it's not pointing the wrong way. Butane is a little bit cooler, it's around 550, but it does the job. But with MAP, the temperature will be very high, so you don't need to stay that long. I put on the videos on YouTube, YouTube links here, and also you can find the video embedded on Blackboard. For safety, we're not wearing any short sleeves for this lab. Make sure you wear goggles and gloves and your mask, and we'll take turn using the device. I'll want to watch you while you do it, and make sure you have the right process. And take your time, and you're going to do at least two solders in one pipe, and it will be good practice. If you want to practice more, let me know. Okay, see you in the lab, and please watch the videos on YouTube. Thank you.